On Easter Monday 2025, Pope Francis died. His passing reminded me of an interesting fact. In his first encyclical, written at the start of his pontificate in 2013, the Pope quoted Nietzsche. More specifically, he quoted a letter Nietzsche wrote to his sister, the infamous Elisabeth. The citation appears in the prologue to the encyclical letter called Lumen Fidei, the light of faith. Let's take a closer look. First of all, Lumen Fidei is based on a draft made by his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI. Benedict had earlier quoted a famous aphorism from Beyond Good and Evil in another encyclical called Deus Caritas Est, God is Love. He quoted Nietzsche as saying that Christianity poisoned eros, and so turned love into a vice. The text is a philosophical and theological meditation on eros, the Christian conception of spiritualized love, as opposed to the earthly, sensual conception of love. Deus Caritas Est was the first text in a trilogy of sorts. It was followed by Spe Salvi, Saved in Hope, and then was to be followed by Lumen Fidei, the text that Pope Francis finished in his stead. Together, they would each represent the three theological virtues: charity, hope, and faith. Benedict was always more philosophically minded than Francis. He knew Kierkegaard very well, and he admired the Greeks. And although Nietzsche is not tackled in depth in these texts, the fact that he is directly quoted in two of the three speaks to a conviction that Nietzsche, at the very least, is someone to be reckoned with in the modern age. In fact, as far as influence and invective go, there is perhaps no more important challenger to Christian dogma than Friedrich Nietzsche. In Lumen Fidei, the text started by Benedict and completed by Francis, Nietzsche is quoted in the introduction. But his influence is felt throughout the entire text. Nietzsche is used as an archetype for the modern human, the philosopher who searches for the truth and concludes against Christianity, who puts humanity before a choice: the falsehood of Christianity or the truth of philosophy and science. Let's take a closer look. Yet in speaking of the light of faith, we can almost hear the objections of many of our contemporaries. In modernity, that light might have been considered sufficient for societies of old, but was felt to be of no use for new times, for a humanity come of age, proud of its rationality and anxious to explore the future in novel ways. Faith thus appeared to some as an illusory light, preventing mankind from boldly setting out in quest of knowledge. The young Nietzsche encouraged his sister Elisabeth to take risks, to tread new paths, with all the uncertainty of one who must find his own way, adding that this is where humanity's paths part. If you want peace of soul and happiness, then believe. But if you want to be a follower of truth, then seek. Belief would be incompatible with seeking. From this starting point, Nietzsche was to develop his critique of Christianity for diminishing the full meaning of human existence and stripping life of novelty and adventure. Faith would thus be the illusion of light, an illusion which blocks the path of a liberated humanity to its future. Unfortunately, this is as far as the text's engagement with Nietzsche himself goes. As we mentioned, in the rest of the text, Nietzsche is propped up as an archetype for the modern, rational, searching man. But this is where the biggest problem reveals itself. The fact of the matter is that, aside from all the disagreements when it comes to religion and philosophy, Nietzsche and the Catholic Church simply have different aims in mind. The Catholic Church is universal in nature. Nietzsche, by contrast, and he doesn't shy away from this, is an elitist. He writes for the select few. His masterpiece, Zarathustra, is a book for all and none. Beyond Good and Evil is a book dedicated to a few free spirits who are brave enough to carry his philosophy to its logical conclusion. It's not written for the masses, nor is it trying to have a popular message. His most anti-Christian book, appropriately titled The Antichrist, has this passage in the preface. This book belongs to the most rare of men. Perhaps not one of them is yet alive. Very well then, of that sort only are my readers, my true readers, my readers foreordained. Of what account are the rest? The rest are merely humanity. One must make oneself superior to humanity in power, in loftiness of soul, in contempt. This is, of course, the opposite of what the Catholic Church is trying to do, namely, to speak for everyone. And so, when Lumen Fidei goes beyond its introduction and starts to get into its main points, we read time and again an appellation to the common good. For example, we are willing to allow for subjective truths of the individual, which consist in fidelity to his or her deepest convictions, yet these are truths valid only for that individual and not capable of being proposed to others in an effort to serve the common good. But the common good, that's the very last thing that Nietzsche concerns himself with. One must renounce the bad taste of wishing to agree with many people. Good is no longer good when one's neighbor takes it into his mouth. And how could there be a common good? The expression contradicts itself. That which can be common is always of small value. Nietzsche simply doesn't care for the common good. He cares for the individual, the powerful Übermensch who will create new values, who goes beyond good and evil, the single solitary genius who bends the world to his will. This is the diametric opposite to the Catholic mission. It's not just a philosophical disagreement, it's a fundamentally different aim. Furthermore, Nietzsche might be an atheist, but that doesn't mean he doesn't understand the value of religion. In fact, a large part of the genealogy and Beyond Good and Evil is about how religion shapes a society, and not always in a detrimental way. His problem, rather, is that God is dead, and God is not dead because Nietzsche has killed him, but because we have killed him. Western philosophy took away the foundations for faith. The death of God is not the result of Nietzsche debunking the Christian faith. In fact, as far as Nietzsche is concerned, that debunking already took place centuries ago. Long before Nietzsche became associated with the phrase God is dead, it was in fact Voltaire, and with him the Enlightenment in general, who took the title of deicide, killer of God. We can cite, for example, the lament of the romantic poet Alfred de Musset, who sarcastically asks Voltaire if he's happy now, having killed God, and leaving the next generations in ruins, without hope, without certainty, without comfort. Do you sleep well, Voltaire, and does your hideous smile flutter still over your emaciated bones? Your century was, they say, too young to read you. Ours should please you. Your men are born. So when Pope Francis asks the following question in Lumen Fidei, this being the case, can Christian faith provide a service to the common good with regard to the right way of understanding truth? We can guess the answer of Francis will be a resounding yes. But is that actually the case? The problem of modernity, from a Christian perspective, is that we have gone through 300 years of enlightenment, modernity, and now, some might say, post-modernity. The Christian narrative lost its normative power, and many appeals that Francis makes here in this text, to the Bible, to St. Paul, to the words of Jesus, have lost the authority that they once had, an authority that remained largely unchallenged for most of history, but which was dealt a death blow with the advent of enlightenment and modernity. This history and challenge to Christianity has been in the making long before Nietzsche finally announced the death of God. But where Nietzsche is concerned, the disagreement runs even deeper, beyond Christianity itself. The question is, ultimately, how should we live our lives? But the question itself is a trick question. For the Catholic Church, this question is a universal one. For Nietzsche, it's an individual one. In Lumen Fidei, Francis distinguishes two kinds of light, two kinds of truth, if you will. There is the subjective truth, and there is the objective truth. In speaking of the subjective truth, he says, we are willing to allow for subjective truths of the individual, which consist in fidelity to his or her deepest convictions, yet these are truths valid only for that individual and not capable of being proposed to others in an effort to serve the common good. This is a type of authenticity that is very Nietzschean in nature, and we can say that it typifies the mindset of the modern man. But opposed to this, of course, the Pope puts the objective truth of Christianity. And this answer is obviously to be expected from the head of the Catholic Church. But Nietzsche's problem here is not with Christianity per se, although of course he has many issues with Christianity. But more fundamentally, the problem lies with the idea of objective truth itself. It might be Christianity, it might be something else. But to ascribe to Christianity, one must ascribe to the notion of objective truth first. And here, Nietzsche is again the opponent. And this time, the troubles run deeper than a mere critique of Christianity. It amounts to a critique of objective truth itself. Nietzsche is simply not concerned with an objective truth that, by definition, would be valid for everyone. Again, what is common is always of small value. Nietzsche doesn't write for the common man, he writes for the exceptional man. Any notion of truth that implies a degree of objectivity is suspect for this very reason. What does the Übermensch care for the truth? As if he shares anything with the common man beneath him. In that vein, we can cite one of Nietzsche's most interesting passages from the Antichrist. Must I add that, in the whole New Testament, there appears but a solitary figure worthy of honor: Pilate, the Roman governor. To regard a Jewish quarrel seriously, that was quite beyond him. One Jew, more or less, what does it matter? The noble scorn of a Roman, before whom the word truth was shamelessly mishandled, enriched the New Testament with the only saying that has any value. And that is, at once, its criticism and destruction. What is truth? Quid est veritas, indeed. And thank you for watching. I've thought about doing a full video on Nietzsche and Pontius Pilate and his critique of objective truth, and if that sounds like something you'd like to watch, then please leave a comment. In light of recent events though, I felt like this video was perhaps more appropriate. It's also been a few days since Good Friday, and in honor of that day, which Richard Wagner viewed as the most theologically important day of the year, I sat down with Essential Salts, host of the Nietzsche podcast, for a 2-hour conversation on Wagner's final opera, Parsifal, which is, of course, filled with Christian theology and Schopenhauerian philosophy. The conversation is up on Patreon, available to our supporters. So this is a good moment as well to thank our patrons, whose generous support keeps the channel alive. If you want to support the work we do here and get access to exclusive content, then please take a look over there and consider donating. Of course, likes, comments, and shares are greatly appreciated too, and don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. With that said, again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.